Everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 4-game college basketball slate and a 6-game NBA slate for you. Before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? I'm actually going to do NBA first because college basketball is kind of a mess today, so let's go ahead and get into the slate. This does feature a 6-game slate. 3 of these games are over 240 points, 2 of these games are under 220 points, which is pretty wild. So we also have mostly pretty even spread on most of these games, around 4 to 6 points, with the exception being Oklahoma City being an 11-point favorite to Washington, and Milwaukee being an 8.5-point favorite to Utah. So all the other games should be pretty tight. Looking at the injury report here for the Celtics, Tatum, Porzingis, and Hauser are all questionable. For the Pacers, Brown, Nimhard, and Jackson are questionable. For the Wizards, Shamet and Wright are questionable. For the Bulls, Caruso and Williams are questionable. For the Hornets, Ball, Williams, Hayward, and Washington are out. For the Rockets, Eason and Brooks are out. For the Heat, Butler is out and Martin is doubtful. For the Bucks, Lillard, Crowder, and Payne are out. And for the Suns, Gordon and Bull are questionable and Durant is doubtful. So lots of injuries. That's really going to change up this slate as we get closer to it probably. This slate does start at 7. It does include the late game at 10:30, which is the Phoenix Clipper game, so keep that in mind. With that said, I do have some plays I do like, at least at this point, so we'll have to wait and see about a lot of these questionable tags, because the Celtics have a lot of guys out, Pacers have a lot of questionable tags, Wizards, Bulls both have questionable tags, Hornets have a lot of guys out in general, and then the Bucks do as well. So my two core plays here are Chris Middleton, who should get a big usage bump with Lillard being out and him playing a full complement of minutes now. He's no longer on minutes restriction like he was, so he should be a really solid option today. I also like Andre Jackson Jr. Um, for Milwaukee, as he should slot into being the starting point guard today. He hadn't played a whole lot throughout the season, but he did have a couple games in the middle of the year where he played some, and that has helped. He did play well in those 2 games where he had over 20 minutes, and I expect him to get in that range. So he has some really good fantasy potential today, being that he's minimum price. But a lot of that could change as we get the slate and figure out the injuries for several of these teams. With that said, our 2 games that are the most stackable, or the 3 games that are stackable today, are Boston, Indiana, Oklahoma City, Washington, and Utah, Milwaukee. Those 3 games all have 240 point totals or higher. The other 3 games are significantly lower and probably somewhat avoidable, but we do have some plays from them that are worth looking at. So we're going to start with our other plays that we do like here, and we're going to start with Shea Alexander. He's just too cheap for what he's doing right now. Even though, and this game is one of the higher scoring games on the slate, gives him a lot of potential here. He is a great option on this slate. I was really wanting to make him a core play, but it's going to be somewhat hard to pick between him and Giannis today because Giannis is going to have a lot of opportunity to have an absolutely monster game, which he's been having a lot lately. And so he definitely has some potential today. With Lillard out, he should be the brunt of the usage for his team, and he should get the assists today, which he hadn't really had a whole lot of throughout the season, not like he normally does. But with Lillard off the floor, he's going to get a huge boost from that perspective. Then we're going to look at Chet Holmgren for Oklahoma City. Now, he is a little bit of a contrarian play off of Chris Middleton if you want. He also can slot into the center position, which helps. His price is pretty good. He's been pretty solid for a while now, though his price has come up a lot as a result. He's in a favorable position here in a good matchup against Washington, who's been absolutely terrible against big guys, so he's definitely somebody that I like and was very close to being a core play as well. Looking at Bam Adebayo, he's a good option today against Houston. Even though Houston's had a tough matchup, been a tough matchup for big guys, he's pretty much matchup proof and he's playing extremely well right now, especially with the Heat being short-handed. His usage is off the charts and he's getting double doubles most games. So if he can get a double double here, he'll definitely likely pay off. Terry Rozier has played very well with ball out. He's had a couple off games, but for the most part, he plays pretty solid. The problem with this game is it could be a slowdown game, which it was the last time they played, and he didn't do particularly well in that game, only scoring 31 fantasy points. But I look for him to bounce back here. His price is a little bit high, but he's just a solid option anytime ball is out, and as long as he's getting all the usage he can handle, especially with all the guys out for the Hornets, he should have some utility today. Looking at Colin Sexton, he's a very boomer bust guy, but he's played well lately, so he's worth a look here. The matchup is definitely favorable since Lillard won't play, but he still carries some risk as his minutes are not as concrete as some of the other players on the slate. And then we'll look at Tyus Jones for Washington. He's been really improving recently. He has had some down games, but his price point is pretty decent here. He can have that big time upside. He hasn't been consistent this season like we hoped, but he is capable of a solid game here, and he's definitely a potential option on the slate for a mid range price point guy. Obviously, like I said, there's a lot of injury questions for several teams here, which will definitely play into what we might do later as the slate turns out. But this Boston Indiana game is really going to be one to pay attention to from a fantasy perspective. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But let's go and get over to the college basketball, and I'll kind of knock this one out here. So for college basketball, we have a 4 game slate. Now, this slate is unusual as it features 4 games with a lot of teams that basically nobody's ever heard of. I mean, I've heard of them because I'm a big college basketball fan, but we don't really follow these teams because they're not usually fantasy relevant. However, today they are. They're all small market teams. So we have Monmouth versus Northeastern. That game has a 3-point spread in Monmouth's favor for Nicholls State versus Southeast Louisiana. This game has a 4.5-point spread for Nicholls State. Northwestern State versus McNeese. This game is at a 20-point favor for McNeese. Um, Sorry, that's Northeastern, not North. No, it is Northwestern State. Sorry. Okay. And then Texas A&M Corpus Christi versus Houston Baptist or Houston Christian. Minus 11.5 point in Texas A&M Corpus Christi's favor. All these games are pretty tight. Well, no, McNeese is obviously a 20-point favorite in their game, but all the games have a similar spread in 140, 145 points. Texas A&M Corpus Christi does have a little bit higher at 151 points, but I'll explain why I don't think that's going to matter too much here. So we're going to look at these game to game here. Now, this, like I said, there's a lot of risk with this game slate because it's hard to find injury information for teams. So I've had to go through and look at individual matchups or recent games to see what their starting lineups look like and stuff like that. And a lot of these teams do change their lineups around some, but I will get into that as I go through each game. So first of all, we're going to look at Northeastern and Monmouth. Now this game, like I said, is favored in Monmouth's favor by 3 points. This game does actually feature some options from a fantasy perspective, but they do carry some risk. Looking at Monmouth first, we have 3 guys, and one being Rice, who is their best player. He should play the most minutes on this team. He is also the most expensive option. He is an extremely risky play today, though, but he definitely carries some potential in this one. Then we're going to look at this guy here. I cannot begin to know how to make his name, but he definitely carries some high risk today, as he has a high ceiling and a low floor. So he's definitely in play, but he's definitely carrying a lot of risk. Same with Collins, has extreme risk, high ceiling, low floor. But he's actually been rather consistent recently, but he still carries a lot of risk because he has not been particularly great throughout the season. So he's definitely in play, but definitely a risky play. Monmouth should win this game, but it's definitely going to be a questionable game with the Northeastern here. Now they actually have the one questionable tag that's available on the slate, and that's Dakota. Now he usually does start, and if he doesn't start, then King will play. If he doesn't play, then King will start. Now that doesn't really bode well for fantasy perspective because King's not done much in his starts this season. But Doherty, Prigdon, Turner, and McClintock all have some utility on the slate, but they're all very risky and have some potential, but high risk, high reward. This game being close could benefit them a little bit. They do play about an 8 to 9 man rotation, so they're not anybody on this team is not a must play, but they definitely have some utility here. As for Monmouth, they play pretty much 6 guys, and that definitely gives their starting lineup a little bit of potential as a result. Looking at Nicholls State and Southeast Louisiana. This game has a 4.5 point spread for Nicholls. I do expect this game to be pretty tight going down to the wire. However, we have 2 different looks from a fantasy perspective here. Southeast Louisiana really doesn't show anything worth looking at as they play a little bit deeper of a bench. They tend to go about 7 or 8 deep, and they don't have a lot of value because they're overpriced extremely, and they don't have many guys that actually meet their expectation for today. Looking at Nicholls State, we actually have 2 guys that look really solid today, and Jamal West Jr., who has played very well and very consistent. He's priced up, but he's definitely in play, and he's one of my favorite plays on the slate. Looking at Smith for them as well, he's a little bit cheaper. He has had a couple floor games where he didn't play many minutes, but I think that was due to some injury situations. But he did miss quite a few games as a result. But he's been absolutely a force playing max minutes when he is playing, so he's definitely worth it, a look today. He is a core play for me because of that as well. A couple other guys we could look at is Robert Brown the third. Now he definitely carries some risk today, as he has a high ceiling and low floor, but he's played well in situations. And then White for them, he's also extremely risky today. Has a low floor, but he has played well in certain situations. But I think that had a lot to do with when Smith was out. So be very careful with him. Looking at McNeese and uh, Northwestern State here, this game features at least one team that I'm probably going to avoid, and that is Northwestern State. They are expected to get blown out in this game. Though they do have one player that is halfway decent in Cliff Davis. He's probably the only guy that's gonna get some consistent amount of minutes. Most of their players they change up the lineup and go pretty deep, so they're pretty avoidable from that perspective. But Davis does have some low end utility here, though they will likely get blown out. Looking at McNeese State, we definitely have some options here. So Shoemate is one of my favorite plays from this team. Now they do carry some risk, as if it does get to a blowout, maybe he doesn't play quite as many minutes, but he really hadn't had that situation too much this season in blowouts. He still usually gets around 28, 30 fantasy points, and he does need about 28 today on this one. Looking at a couple other options from this team, Column is in play, but he is risky today as he does have that low floor, but he's capable and he has been a decent play in certain situations, and this should give him some advantage. We have three other plays that have some utility today. Wells being one of them, though he is extremely expensive. He does have the high risk, high reward being the blowout potential, but he's definitely capable of paying off here. And then Richards for them, he's also in play, but high risk, extremely high risk. Same with Felder, who's an extremely high risk, high reward option on the slate. I definitely think that it's going to be risky to use those guys, but definitely worth a look. Looking at Texas A&M Corpus Christi and Houston Baptist Christian, this game does feature some options, though it's definitely a risky game with Texas A&M being 11-point favorite. It could get out of hand, but I do like some players from this game, but it's definitely a risky one. Texas A&M Corpus Christi is a concerning team because they are extremely risky due to the fact that they play about 9 guys. At least 17 minutes a game, and they don't have anybody that averages over 23 minutes a game. But we do have four guys that have some potential today. Clark is one of them. He is probably the guy that's the most consistent on the team, which is why his price is high. But he definitely carries some risk. He's just a little bit overpriced for what his potential is for the game. But he definitely has that potential today, so he's definitely worth a look. Same goes for Humphrey. He definitely carries some risk, though he doesn't have the minute consistency that makes you very happy. But he's cheap enough that he's worth a look, though he does definitely carries that low floor and risky situation. Then we'll look at Prim. Now, he doesn't always start, and that is a concern. This team pretty much changes their starting lineup game to game, and that is a concern here. He's a little bit overpriced here, but he definitely has the potential if he draws a start. Same with Paul. Again, this guy hadn't started all the games recently, but he definitely has some potential here. And he's nice and cheap, but he definitely carries that high risk from that perspective. Looking at Houston Baptist, they aren't favored to win the game, but they actually do have a couple guys that are very interesting, namely Nate Hudson being the top one. If he draws a start again, which he started the last game for the first time, that he would definitely be in play. He played 35 minutes in that game, and they actually didn't win. So I do think that he has some capability today, though he definitely carries some risk. Um, but I think at his price point, he's worth probably a flyer. He was very close to being somebody I wanted to make a core play, but again, it's just hard to find information on these teams to know if these lineups are going to hold, and this team does interchange their lineup quite a bit, so that is a concern. Looking at Emirajabi, he definitely carries some potential today, but he also is high risk, and he's a little bit pricey for what the risk is here. Same with Maring. He definitely carries some potential today as he has a high ceiling, but he also has that low floor that's very unbecoming. Same with Green. All pretty much the three best players all have the high floor, low ceiling situation, but they do have some potential. Looking at Alvarez, he also has some potential today. He's a little bit cheaper, though he does have that low floor again. He's actually had some really big games, and if they can keep this game close, he would definitely have some potential, but I definitely don't know if that's likely. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to leave them below, and have a nice day, guys.